Here's the sequence of events that we're going to try now to help you understand how you can use a simple cardboard frame and elastic bands to find the scale and composition that you first want. I'm going to use a pleasant but complicated little photograph of North Landing on the East Yorkshire coast just above Bridlington to show you this. I'll show you how to make these angles, and then we'll move on to how to measure in between each angle as well, finally finishing up with the drawing of the buzzard and showing you actually in situ and we're actually doing it. If you don't do any picture mounting yourself, then to go to your local picture framer and ask if he has a few small offcuts of mount card, and then cut a rectangle to the same sort of size and shape that you usually work on, in other words to the scale of. That white area is the white sheet of paper. Then you can mark the inner edges into halfways, quarters, eighths and sixteenths as small as you wish. We can actually then make a grid, an imaginary grid, or we can use elastic bands across those angles to see angles through the frame. We can choose our composition through the frame first of all by moving it further forward or backwards to get more or less into the picture, and as you see by putting an elastic band across, you can check the angles of the scene behind. Let's see what that looks like. Using this method you'll also mark your paper with the same quarters, eighths, sixteenths as well, so that wherever the lines come to or the areas come to in your composition and you see them through the frame, you'll mark the same places on your actual paper and the picture. If you were working from a photograph, you could draw the lines across the photograph if you didn't mind wasting the photograph, and then draw them right across the paper. But in this case we're looking at the actual scene, so the lines either have to be imaginary across the card, or we use these elastic bands so we can actually see where they are. And now you can see here by moving the bands we can check the angles against the frame and where those angles come, so that our drawing, as you see here, will reflect the same angles. Okay, now you've seen how to use those angles simply and basically on South Bay Bridlington. Let's move to the North Landing scene we were talking about and do the whole thing right through. So first of all you choose the type of scene you want, then you can choose whether you want the paper to be horizontal or vertical, landscape or portrait, and you hold your picture frame in exactly the same way that you wish to see the painting done. In other words, in this case it's landscape, and by moving it closer towards us or further away we see more or less through it. So here we see slightly less, and then again by turning the frame vertically we see less again, but we have more sky. And so by using a combination of the elastic bands to find the angles and where things come, and using horizontals and verticals, the imaginary lines across from our quarters and eighths, we can mark on the paper where these various angles and marks come. So here's our horizontal and vertical marks, and then we'll add on the diagonals to give the salient and main points of our composition. You must remember that the first 2 or 3 marks we make dominate or guide the entire drawing, because once you've decided where those first 2 marks are, then all the proportions are worked from those first 2 marks across the whole rest of the painting. I'll show you that here. You must have seen artists on television or actually out working holding up pencils like I am in the top left there and wonder what on earth they're doing. They're squinting with one eye and twisting this pencil or paintbrush around. Well, here's the composition we want to do. Here's the sort of drawing we want to finish up with. Now how on earth do we get to that complicated standard? Well, you can see the lines that I'm using to find all of the salient and main points and angles here from my frame. And now for this trick of scaling with the pencil. You see I've got 2 trees at the top, and by holding my thumb lower down the pencil, holding my arm outstretched, it must be at arm's length. If you don't keep your pencil at arm's length, then the scale will change. If your arm is closer, the pencil will become larger. And as you see here, we can guess that the tree is the whole length of the pencil, and I can move my thumb up or down to get that. And if I move the pencil across, keeping my thumb where it is and the arm outstretched, the other tree is half the distance of the pencil, so it's half the height of the first tree. Now to move on to the illustration below, you'll see I've put the pencil across the 3 trees, and I can gauge how many trees I can fit into that pencil in distances, and it comes into the 2 halves. And so using my cardboard cutout frame, I can choose where I want the first few points to come by the elastic bands and by the angles. I can choose where I want things to come in my painting. Then afterwards, once I've made those first couple of marks as I have here, I can start to measure out the angles, again using the frame but using my pencil as well as I am here, to judge both the angles and the distances between things. Using my pencil, I've discovered that halfway along the pencil length between the edge of the boat on the left and the boat on the right comes an angle along the side of one of the boats that I'll then draw in, and I can then measure the distance between where my thumb is and the end of the boat is by holding my arm out straight, like this. And again, it's halfway up the pencil again to the distance of the marks that I've made. So we're scaling things, as you can see here. It's all comparative to the first couple of marks we made. We know the distance of them, so we know the distance must be the same to all of the other things relevant to those first two marks. And we can gradually build our picture up, piece by piece, angle by angle, everything being relevant to the first few marks. If those first few marks are correct, then all of the rest of the picture will be as well, as long as we measure each thing relevant one to another. But don't worry if this seemed very complicated and you don't quite understand. You can come back to this later. Well, how do we go about drawing such a complicated thing? I think one of the easiest ways to explain this is to look at some of the demonstrations I've already done, showing using the scale of a frame, a cardboard frame like this, where I've used the elastic bands and divided the frame into quarters and eighths and sixteenths. I've done the same with the edge of the paper. And we can use elastic bands across it as well, so that you can gauge the angles of things. This one I've already set up to the bird here, and here's a quick shot of what it looks like through it. First of all, we have to set up a composition, and I've done that showing you these photographs of how I want my bird to fit into the shape of the paper. But I also have to consider a background in this case. I don't just want to paint a blank background or the one that's here, the bare wall. I want to have an interesting composition. So here's a whole series of compositions where I put a background of a snow scene done, a snow scene taken locally here, and I've chosen the angle that I want and the size of the bird in it. Once I've established that, I know how large the bird is going to be within my composition. So I can do that on the photograph, I can do it on the computer, but I know the size I want within my paper. Now all I have to do then is use my card frame to work out where it's going to come within the frame of the picture, my composition that is, and I can set the angles up. It's just how I want it. I've drawn in some of the angles here, you can see them just lightly, the construction lines we call them, and then once I've made a few points in the right places which are relevant to the outside of the paper, halfway, quarter, eighth, sixteenths, same this way, once I've made a few marks that are absolutely in the right place, in the right proportions to the rest of the composition, I've got it made, because all I have to do then is scale everything else out from here. If these first two marks, it's the first two marks that tell us the whole of the painting, the whole of the composition. If our first two marks are in the correct place and at the correct width, everything else should be able to be measured from it. For instance, once I have these basic two marks made, maybe this one or this one, in this case I've got the angle of the wing here and the angle of the wing there, and I've got the construction lines showing here which come up to the relevant marks on the side of the paper. Once I have these few marks, I can say, right, for instance, this measurement here, from there to there, is the same from here to there. So if I hold my hand out straight, and it has to be straight, because look what happens if we change the angle. The pencil becomes larger or smaller. My arm is fully extended straight, and I can now take the measurement between the wing on the bird and its head, like that. And if I move across to the other same position, the similar position the other side, yes, it's exactly the same. So I know that this position, this mark here, is going to be the same from there to there as from here to there, providing, make a little mark, providing this is correct. So having got that, we can say, okay, if that's correct, then this is the same, is this angle the same here? Then we look back at the bird and we say, no, the angle is slightly different there. It's that angle there, but it's that angle there. So we have to change that angle slightly on that one. So here we have this one coming out like so, and this piece here. Then we can take the measurement, the distance from here to there, let's say, is it the same as the neck? So we measure the distance between the neck and the wing, and we come across to the neck, and yes, it's about the same situation. So this is the same as this. So there's where our mark should be. We make a mark. Now we go back to that measurement across the the width of the wings. It's approximately the same from there to there as from there to there. That's what I've already got. So this proves I'm right on that point. Now, across there's a construction line from here to there. There's a straight line across, an angle across. The bird's wing comes up at that angle. It then finishes here, our mark to come up here, and then having got that distance, this distance here is the same as this one. Let's check that again. So on the bird here, we move the pencil tip to the edge of the wing and we put it here then, and it's the same, yes. So this distance is the same from there to there as there to there. That gives us that little one, and then from there the wing just fluffs out a bit. The feathers actually start, this is the main angle of the wing. And you see how we can build the bird bit by bit, and as long as it fits within these construction lines and these marks are correct, we can measure this one piece to another, gradually getting it right. Let's take for instance the top of the head here, which comes up at that angle. The fluffy bit there, head comes up here, that's the angle, comes forward. How much space in between there and there? Is it the same as the head? Let's take a look. So we put the tip of the pencil there at the head of the beak and the back of the head, move it across, and yes, it's the same. So this measurement here is the same as this measurement here, and yes, we have it right, that's good. So now all I have to do is get the angles right, bring the beak down, you see how we can gradually build up from just a few dots and dashes to the whole thing. Now you remember, you've probably seen comics as a child where they have a little picture of somebody's head or face or an animal where you have to join the dots together to make the face. This is almost what we're doing here. We're putting dots and dashes at the right angles and distances to gradually join them up more and more and more into detail until we have our eagle, until we have it exactly right. The top of the beak is here. I'm just going to get a little more detail in this one piece just to show you, and then the eye comes in line with the beak back here. Beak comes underneath slightly, down there at an angle, and you start to see how we can easily get a very complicated piece of drawing right doing it this way. It's down there. Now we'll have a look at the body. The distance from the head down, let's say we're going to go down now to look at where the base of the body, the belly finishes here before the tail starts underneath. So if the belly is there, how many heads, how many of these areas from there to there can we fit into here? And you wouldn't think the leg would be on the outside of the angle of this bird, but it actually is. And it wasn't until I dropped that line down like that vertically that I could see so. How wide is this leg? Yes, how wide is it compared to the neck? There we take the width of the leg, come up to the neck, and it's about 2/3. So if we take 2/3 of the neck, then I'm about 2/3 of the neck. There, my finger, the tip of the pencil come down to here, 2/3, and I'm about right there, so that wasn't far out. How long down is this one? How far down is this from here? Let's again check that and see how far it is compared to the neck on the bird. Right, the distance there. Put the pencil just down where the fluff finishes, the feather finishes on the leg. Move my thumb down till it's in the right place, then come back up to the bird itself, check against the neck, from head to neck. And again it's about 2/3 here, so from there to there 2/3, 2/3 from there to there, and that's the area. So you see how we can just make marks, dots and dashes, marks and lines in the right places, and once I've got all these proportions, these basic dots and dashes all in the right places, then I can come back and start to do very detailed or more correct drawing. So this is just a way of building things up by measuring with the finger and thumb and pencil the various angles and distances, and we can use our frame as well to do just the same thing. And through this we can see the bird behind and get the angles in just the same way. In that case there's the angle of the wing with the yellow band top left, you see. So let's recap finally. You can see now that I've got my basic drawing of the bird done, and it isn't very basic. I could paint within that and just rely on my painting techniques completely, but I should do a little bit more work into this now in more detail. So when we start off, we've got two choices. We can either look at the bird through the frame and get our composition that way, and the angles, and work out where it wants to be in our paper, or we can go on the computer and use the photographs, and we can move the bird around into the scene that we want to get the composition we want, and then measure off that. So we have two ways. We can just work directly from the actual thing and use the frame and the measurements on the frame and the paper, or we can work on the computer and move photographs together and make a composite of it. Anyway, now I'm ready to go on, having got all my basics of this drawing, the proportions right, to do more detail ready for my painting on top, because in this case I want a very photographic, more representational painting, although I'm going to use a lot of different watercolour techniques in it. Right, I want to discuss colour with you first of all, before I move on to a bit of watercolour. It's exactly the same painting, so how different it can be done. The first thing we talked about just now was light against dark, rough against smooth, and warm against cool. There's a couple of my paintings done with acrylics on the top, and that one is done on a black background. That's why I chose this. Warm against cool. I've used the paint as glazes on here, building up thinly like a watercolour, because we've all these different ways of using the paint, which is what I was saying earlier. So I've used it thinly and then gradually gone fat over lean. In other words, I've used the paint thinly and leanly, as you can with oil paint, in the same way. You use paint with terps, the oil paint, and then built up thicker and thicker and thicker to try and get that sort of ghostly light. This one down here, what do you think that's done it? Yeah, sure. Pastel's the last one. Starting with the China graph pencil, black China graph pencil, then watercolour, and then it's the snow scene we did, and then the pastel at the end. And that's used with water as well. So we've got watercolour and we've got water and pastel and we've got the different effects that we want. But the main thing here was the different blues. As we say, every single colour has a hue, every hue is a warm and a cool. So the lemon yellow was cooler than the cadmium yellow. We've got warm ultramarine here, we've got cool cerulean back here, and so on. And that's going to then take me on to the next one, when we were talking about cyan, magenta and yellow, because in fact, rather than making cadmium red our red, we're going to use mainly cyan. And look what happens when we put the cyan over the yellow, we get the cadmium red. So if we're only basing our colour palette, as some artists do, on those...
I've never come across cyan.
Yeah, well, cyan is one that's used in the printer. Cyan is very similar to turquoise and cerulean. So cerulean and turquoise are in the cyan range, okay? The magenta, you've seen, rose can also be used as a magenta. So rose is also magenta. The yellow, depending which yellow we've got, here we've got something like a cadmium or chrome yellow, it's a mid-yellow rather than a lighter version. And then those opposites in the colour circle, look how they look when they're against their opposite, how much brighter they seem against the opposites. And that's what we can play if we're doing a beach scene or something and we want bright umbrellas, or we want bright, or we want fluorescent. So it's important that you begin to understand the chemistry of colour. It's not just... And then we've got colour intensity, the saturation of colour, how bright a colour is with the amount of pigment in it, or becomes desaturated as you start to mix them together. So we're going to look at that in a moment. Let's move on. So those are our main basic three if we wanted to be pure colours and mix. If we start mixing with other colours, like cadmiums and so on, they'll be muddy. These are going to be nice, clean, pure colours. So let's go on from there. We look now at the colour circle itself.
So is that the actual blue that you would advise getting at?
What we're saying is for mixing, if you have those three colours, then if you put that with that, you get that deep blue.
That colour is called cyan.
That's the cyan, or the cerulean, or the turquoise. They're all in the cyan range. So you don't have to go and buy cyan.
Yeah.
That turquoise would do, or that cerulean is just there. The cerulean is a fraction warmer. But then you can make it warmer by adding this. But you cannot make that purple without having the magenta. If you try and add cadmium red, cadmium red to blue, you get mud. The magenta, as I'm going to show you in a minute, will give you...
And the yellow is cadmium yellow?
That is a chrome or cadmium on this, because a lemon yellow will be too light. And if you go darker than that, you go to an orange, or warmer than that, you go to an orange. So on that, for them down to here, we've got primary, secondary, tertiary colours. As you mix them, they become secondary or they become tertiary. So if you wanted a brown would be red, yellow and blue. It's the third one along. You've got 3 lots of colours, tertiary. Secondary would be red and blue and yellow, which would be a green. So 2 colours secondary, 3 colours and more tertiary. And our primary colours here, if we use those primary colours, we're going to get mud, aren't we? So I'm suggesting you consider more the CYM palette, because you're going to get purer colours. I'm not giving you one rule. For every way of painting there is an opposite. For every rule that's there to be broken. I'm not saying this is the Peterwood way, it's the only way. No way. I'm just saying I'm giving you options, different ways of painting. This is what we've done in these lessons. We've looked at different ways every single time. And then you take your ways and you take other ways that you've been using and you put them together to your own style. I've been looking at this recently from another artist who's using that palette, very, very strong colours, and I love them. So I shall take from him and use it in mine. I'm not copying him, I'm using. And I don't mind people using my stuff, which is why I share this on YouTube. Right, having looked at that then, you can see also the warms and cools as they come round. Purple is an in-between blue and red. It's the mixture. It's neither a red or a blue, it's in between. And the green is in between the yellow and the blue. One comes into another, and this is the coolest end of it, isn't it? It's the turquoise end. And the purple is the coolest end of the reds, but it's also the warmest end of the blues. Yeah, you understand? Okay, we'll take it bit by bit. In terms of taking it all in, but just begin to understand. Go on from there. So we've done CYM, we've now done the normal colour circle, and we can look at passive and active, warmer and the active, bluer on the passive range. And I put these down, in fact they haven't printed out properly, but I did have 2 pictures here. Should be printed, I put them underneath. We looked then at broken colour. Now I showed you earlier how you use the opposites in the colour circle. The blues and sort of the yellows and the purples and the greens and the reds. These are paintings that I've done using that pushing of the opposites in the colour circle and broken colour. So instead of painting just with one block of colour, I've used dots or dashes of colour of the opposites in the colour circle to give that brightness of light. If I wanted a much duller painting, as I'm going to show you in a minute, I would have used a more passive, lower, less saturated, less colour in it, less pigment in it, a less saturated colour range. These are saturated colours, they're really pushing strong colours, aren't they? So if we mix the colours together and start to make those tertiaries, it becomes less saturated. When they're pure colours, they're saturated. So saturated colours using the opposites of the colour circle. So here we've got the purple sky against the yellow rain. If I'd used a different colour for the sky, the rain wouldn't have been as strong in yellow. So deliberately using the opposites there. You can now look at these more closely later. And there is the object. That's the broken colour itself. Look, if we look at it as an impressionist, your eye is fooled from a distance. It's like optical art. The little dots start to blend and make orange. If we mix orange, it doesn't have the same vibrancy as that. Even in your watercolour, if we drop red into yellow, we get a brighter colour often than mixing the red and yellow together. So we've got to think about these different ways of working. Down from there, and I want now to move on to limited palettes. We've had a full range there. We started with those CYM, just 3 colours, and then we've looked at the whole colour range, the gamut that we can mix right the way around of those, haven't we? Now we come down to just using a few colours and what we can do with them. We can make, as Rembrandt did, we can make yellow ochre look like yellow, we can make burnt sienna look like red, we can make grey look like blue. That's just black and white. I'm actually going to use black in this. Normally I don't use black because it's an inert dead colour. I use it in some paintings because it's fairly warm as well. But normally for my mixing I won't have black in my palette. I use deep blue and deep browns and sort of make my colours, and white's always got a tint in. Burnt umber becomes brown when it's added to black, and the green is raw umber because raw umber is a greener colour than the burnt umber. So we're going to make that lot look like these. Can't believe that? I'll show you. There we are. But that's using the grey as a blue. Now if we've got white and black as a grey, and we put a warmer colour next to it, the warmer colour makes the grey look blue. So if I wanted black, I would take the black, which you've just said is blue. You're going to get complicated now. But I'd add to that black a bit of warm to make the black look blacker, or warmer than the blue. So if I take black and add a bit of burnt umber to it, it makes the black warmer, and therefore the black looks cooler here. Turn that again, there we are. There's that palette using a portrait many years ago, but just using that limited palette of a few colours. So we've got time for these things to dry now and everything else. Now going down from that, I'm heading now to where I want to do the watercolour for you. You could use just a few colours like this. And I'm just about to use, I'm going to use in fact burnt sienna, not Indian red, Prussian blue and yellow ochre. From those you can get all those colours. So just those three you could, not using the CYM palette, but they're less saturated colours, aren't they? They're duller colours. So I could have a nice, dull, soft palette using those. I'm going to use Prussian blue, and I'm going to use ultramarine blue as well because it's bluer than the Prussian blue, yellow ochre and burnt sienna in a moment to paint this one. And let's just see how with a few colours in watercolour we can have the effect of this painting. And you just see how many colours I've used in the acrylics. But now we're going to see how few colours we can use just with the watercolour.
Can you do that? Can you do a few colours with the acrylic?
Yes, that one I just showed you was. Yeah.
That was the acrylics.
Yeah, that one of the lady standing, you know, that was a colour of right. So there I've got my basic palette of Prussian blue, ultramarine, yellow ochre, burnt sienna. Right, it's a bit of fun. Nice wet and wet sky, it's a dour Scottish day. So using an acrylic brush, and that's why these brushes are quite nice as I flogged you. They're soft enough to carry water and paint with watercolour, but they're bold and strong enough to still be able to be used with heavier body paint such as oils. Or this is a hot press £140 Waterford. I want it nice and wet. I'm working on the vertical because I want to get the clouds flooding down. Let's start off with my, I should wet my paints first really. Let's just start off with my yellow ochre. Raw sienna is nicer than yellow ochre, by the way. Raw sienna is more transparent.
Are you talking about in watercolour?
In watercolour, yeah. Most actually, but raw sienna, yellow ochre is nice, especially in that's flooding nicely. Okay, now I'm going to take my warmer blue, which is the ultramarine, and a little touch of the red, the burnt sienna, just to make it a slightly greyer colour, and just drop that in here, let it flood down, so we get this lovely feeling of the dour Scottish rain coming down here in the background. Nice. Straight off. Simple as that. Leave it alone, don't play with it. Straight back now to the distance. Let's carry on through here. We've got a soft edge here, so I'm going to bring my brush right through there. Stronger up there. I can always come back while this is still wet. I'm always trying to come back and drop it a bit more in. Into there. We want the background here. I'm going to work my way down, so I'm going to take the yellow ochre again. A little touch of the burnt sienna into that. A wee touch of the blue from earlier. And we'll just hit the top of that line. Again, I want mist in between, so I'm going to let this drop down. A bit more burnt sienna, a little bit more blue, just to get that distant hill. Over on that top edge again. And then we'll just come down, tickle it in, a bit more water, tickle it in down here. Very different way of painting. This is the beauty of art. Choose the best method, the best medium for the subject, and keep your minds open. I want to go a bit bluer. I'm going to just pick up on the tips of these mountains here, a little bit darker than the tops of the mountain here. Coming down, and again, I want to start getting green now, so I'm going to take my yellow ochre and a touch of the blue, and just start to make a green. So it's just a tint, it's just slightly greener than it was without it. But this is the subtlety of using a limited palette. All the way down to there. I want that to be a bit bluer green still, so I'm going to take more of that blue. If I was using some cerulean now, I could really make that go green. Because the cerulean is a greener blue, isn't it? I'm not going to do that. Let's just work these a little bit greener along, a bit darker in places. Let's work to here. Right down through there, obviously down, soft. And I want to get darker still, so I'm going to start playing my stronger blues there. Stronger blue greens. I'll start to feel these. If I use my brush that way, I can start getting the feeling of pine trees. Pine trees coming up into here, light against dark, dark against light. Pine trees coming up in the background and let them flood together down there. Feeling the pine trees like that, right across the top here. You get two for the price of one today. Just feel those coming down softly into here. They get darker as they come down to there. And I'm going to go a bit stronger, so I'll take a bit more of that blue into there. So I'm using more pigment now as well, not just stronger colours, but using more pigment into it as well. Just with a couple of colours, so we haven't got to use the whole plethora all the time. And through there. I'm much stronger just down here. I haven't had to use the Prussian yet. I'm not going to build in, leave that white. Soften it back. Now the Prussian, which is the strongest blue, I've touched it until now. Prussian with a little bit of burnt sienna. It's going to be my darkest of the colours. A bit stronger. Prussian and burnt sienna, my darkest. Bring that along here. Look how dark that is now. Yes, go ahead.
Come in.
Along here, darker on that top edge there. These shadows going on the edge. Right along here. Right, on we go. Take the pure yellow. Look how that looks now compared to the softer colour in the background.
Is that cadmium? No.
No, this is the yellow ochre.
Oh, the yellow.
You see what I mean about suddenly they look so bright that they look, because there are only these few together, we can make them look like other colours.
But have you used less water as well there?
No, yes, that's right, I've used it stronger. Yeah, I've used it more pure, so it's more saturated, isn't it? Right, I want still fairly warm water there, so I'm going to take a very thin wash of the... Now this isn't a rough paper, it's a smooth paper, so I'm not going to get dry brushwork. I can try a little bit, but I should be able to get dry brushwork. I'm going to have to... I want dry brushes, to dry as best I can across here.
Are you being quite careful that your two wet paints are not touching? When
I don't want them flooding just there, so I've deliberately left that light there. But, and again, remember what we said about verticals? I've done, because it's watercolour, I'm a bit more limited than I am with another type of opaque paint. I've got to do dry brush across rather than down.
Do you use watercolours much when you're in France?
Not all that much, but if you look at my site, you'll find that, and I did a whole series last year, it balances, it depends what I want to do, what I feel like doing, it totally balances on what I need to do at the time. And a little warmth with that, we'll take a little bit of the burnt sienna with that blue, and we'll just warm it down here a bit. Now let's go back to those yellows again. And we'll start to add to those yellows a little bit of the warmth. So I'm going from cool in the background to warmer in the foreground.
Is it possible to get acrylics to look as misty as watercolours?
Yes, which is why I showed you that horse just now. Yeah. I mean that.
So I always feel they're more strident somehow. I know.
Well, that depends how thick you use them and how you can use. Remember, you can use the acrylics on paper the same way as you can use the acrylics on canvas. But there's nothing to say that, of course, the acrylics are slightly more opaque. So you can't get this beautiful translucency that you can get with the watercolours. It's not going to be quite the same.
You try a little different with water or the medium to get?
No, just fill it down with water. But now, because I'm using this paint much more thickly here, it puts those softer into the background, doesn't it? And the darks against the light, I can start to play textures now. I haven't got textural brushes with me, so I can only use the brush I've got. It's really helpful, that noise in my films.
There's very big mice here.
Let's open the door.
So I'm building up my light colours here before, now I'm going back to my... I'm going to go back to the ultramarine, to that same colour, the ultramarine and the burnt sienna, to just start making my darks. Moving those darks out against the light here.
So is it, I thought it was Prussian blue.
No, that was here.
Oh, you have. So you've got four colours, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Prussian, ultramarine, yellow. Yeah.
Right. So I'm still using my intermediate one at the moment. I'm still using my ultramarine and that's it. Before I go very dark. So that will give us just an hour and a half to get your painting done. It should be about right. That's for the normal class, maybe. And I'm going bluer now to make the colour, the shadows of these, and those warms stand out more. The warmer I go here, If the bluer I go here, there could be more of those colours you're going to see behind. Now, Prussian and the burnt sienna. For my very darkest, I'm going to get that Prussian going. Voila! Okay, quick lesson, just to dip it in the coffee. Just to give you an idea. So now you're on your own.